How's it going, guys? Music fan here. How are you guys doing? So, 2014 is quickly ending, and 2015 is around the corner, very around the corner. So, I'm gonna do something a little bit different tonight. This is gonna be the last video I make this year, and the next one I won't make until probably sometime later this week. So, for this video, I'm gonna count down my top 10 albums of 2014. These are the albums that have captivated me. These are the albums that have really piqued my interest, and these are the albums that have really took me on a wild musical ride. So, of course, very explanatory. These albums have to have been released this year, and so anything else the other years previous are of course excluded. And just so I can mention, out of the interest of disclosure, these are my picks. These are my albums that I have picked for this particular year. So these are my choices. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna miss a lot of other albums that people may have wanted for me to be on this list. Either like the reasons for that is either I hadn't had the time or the intention to get around to those particular albums, or there was like no time in my schedule to fit any of them to do either a review of them or to consider putting them on the list. So to that, I greatly apologize. I am thinking of making a like missed albums list of like top 10 or top 5 of albums that I could have reviewed and could have put on this list, but didn't because of the reasons I just mentioned. Oh, and also leave on the comment section below what are your top 10 favorite albums of this year, or top 5, or whichever number you find to be concise or very precise for you. So let's start this list off. At number 10 is Michael Jackson's Xscape. So this album came out like I believe sometime this April or May. I don't remember. Maybe like around like in the summertime. And is definitely a notch above the last posthumous Michael album, simply called Michael. A lot of controversy surrounded that particular album, and it really hurt that album's chances of succeeding. But whereas that album was surrounded by controversy, this one was a little less so, and it sounded as if a much better care was taken of the making of this particular album than there was with the previous album. This is of course full of demos and outtakes from various album sessions that Michael Jackson did over the course and span of his career before he died in 2009. But overall, this album is a lot more enjoyable to hear, a lot more accessible to listen to, and a little more interesting to listen to too. Definitely a notch or so above the last posthumous Michael Jackson album. At number 9, we have 1989 by Taylor Swift, and I really was not looking forward to this album when Shake It Off first came out. I thought that song was just simply generic. It sounded very samey like other pop artists like Ariana Grande was doing, and Rihanna and Miley Cyrus, and it was sounded pretty the same as if those artists were doing it. But I was really surprised when I took the time to listen to this album in full, that even though there's none of the country sound that is very familiarized with her present on this album, and replaced by more pop music, more of a new wave aesthetic done in this year than in the past. A lot of these songs still come out very genuinely as Taylor Swift, while at the same time she really takes the time to write thorough and very mature lyric writing. So yeah, this album really took me by surprise, and while I wouldn't rank it among her best, it really sounds like a transition, like she's transitioning away from the country and into something a little more worldly, a little more open than it was with her past work. So we're gonna see where she goes next from here. At number 8, we have the self-titled album Antemasque from the band of the same name. This album was also came out along in July, and this also is the first album from Cedric Bixler Zavala and Omar Rodriguez Lopez of At the Drive-In and the Mars Volta. This album is just simply amazing because this is their most rock-orientated, most song-orientated album since the breakup of At the Drive-In. And these songs are just quick, they're short, they're very punchy, they're very hooky, and they do away with any of the ambitious theatrics, the experimental ambience that pervade a lot of the Mars Volta's later records before they broke up. And this album really took me by surprise just because of the sheer energy and the sheer accessibility of the songs off this album. So this is definitely an amazing album. So wait to see where Omar and Cedric take this group next, and we'll have to wait for the next album. Number 7 is The Dreamwalker by Angels and Airwaves. I've been meaning to do a review of this for the last few weeks or so. I haven't gone around to that yet. But all I can say from this particular album for now is that this is Angels and Airwaves at their most floatiest, at their most beautiful sounding, and yet also at their most dark sounding. Tom DeLonge really sounded as if he took extra special care to really make these songs very short, make these songs very concise, and at the same time put a little more interesting things around it, give it more of a more propulsive push to each of these songs off this album. Like, I'm especially thinking of tracks like Bullets in the Wind, even adding an acoustic number like Anomaly. Teenage and Rituals is a pretty awesome opener. Paralyzed, I did a review of that too. And Tremors. I can do a whole song review of that, and I definitely will in the near future. But definitely Dreamwalker is Angels and Airwaves at their most fluid and at their most creative in a while. So that is definitely a plus. Number 6, we have Everything Will Be Alright in the End by Weezer. Yep, Weezer. This band is back, and in a pretty big way too. The band was kind of really marred with their last few albums, which really had a very mediocre reaction from the fan base. The fan base really didn't react so kindly to their last albums, which really wasn't that rock orientated. So this time, Rivers Cuomo and the company really come back with an album that is very bold and very ambitious, probably their most ambitious in a long time, and is probably the closest that they have gotten so far into replicating the grandiosity and the scale of their first 2 albums, the Blue Album and Pinkerton. And they're much really celebrated albums, and while I wouldn't say this album really ranks among them, this album really is the closest they have ever gotten into properly replicating or even adjoining to those 2 particular albums, the closest they ever gone. This album is ambitious in scope. This album is full of great rock tunes, great rock songs, great guitar leads, great guitar riffs, and Rivers Cuomo's singing, his vocal prowess is really on point here. And he's not the most fantastic singer to date, but his singing really suits the music of this band. And this album is probably my favorite Weezer album in a long time, certainly to date. And at number 5, we have 6 Flora by a band called Botanist. And even though I've been knowing about this band for a while now, I really didn't take any care to notice to even listen to them until I saw Anthony Fantano's review of 6 Flora from his review. And then afterwards, I was so impressed that I took interest into listening to that album. This album is probably the most dynamic album I have ever heard in my life, and this album really changed my notion of what black metal can really do. It's a different take on black metal. There is harmonium and hammered dulcimer, two instruments which really aren't really that prominent in black metal, but they really shine on this particular album, and it creates such a dynamicism that it's so floaty, it's airy, it's beautiful, it's very energetic without being overtly aggressive or even dark. And the album definitely has changed my conception of black metal entirely. So I'm definitely looking forward to what this group has to do next. Yeah. And at number 4, we have The Endless River by Pink Floyd. The name alone, Pink Floyd, should really spawn images of bricks and of rainbows and of prisms and of flying pigs, and the whole shebang. It really should when you mention Pink Floyd. Sadly, this is possibly the last album from this legendary band. These songs were made during the recording sessions for the band's last album, The Division Bell, from 1995. And precisely this album takes a very similar vein to that album, obviously, because it's the last from those sessions. Definitely the last with the now the late Richard Wright, who sadly passed away a few years ago. And for a final album, this album really goes out not with a bang or an extravaganza, but it really goes off in a very chilled and very hushed and very dreamy atmosphere, pretty much like the album cover of this album itself. And it's very sad to hear that this is going to be the final album, but this album is just so floaty, it's so dreamy. Like each of the songs kind of flow together in a seamless weave as if they are one musical piece, which is what Pink Floyd has always advocated and done with their albums ever since Pipers at the Gates of Dawn. And it's a kind of a swan song to really hear from this band of saying goodbye and farewell. And even though it really makes me very sad to see them go, I would think that this is probably a perfect eulogy to Richard Wright and everything that the band stood for. And I am gutted that Roger Waters didn't make an appearance on here, but either way, this album really cements Pink Floyd as their status. They've already cemented, but it still cements their omnipresence in the music world, and we will never get a band like Pink Floyd ever again. So, Pink Floyd, farewell. We thank you for the great music you have blessed us over the decades, and your music will definitely live forever. At number 3, we have Ghost Stories by Coldplay. Of course, we all know who Coldplay is, but the thing that's very interesting about Ghost Stories is that this is their most intimate, their most accessible, and their most haunting sounding album since their first album. Like in between that and this album, the band really became more confident musicians, and this is really evident on the second and the third albums. And between the fourth and the fifth, they really started taking chances with their sound. Here, unlike the last album, Milo Xyloto, this is a little more restrained. There's a lot of the excess electronics, a lot of the excess ambition that was displayed on Milo is really shredded away, and in its place is this very hushed, very intimate setting that all these songs from Always in My Head, Midnight, Another's Arms, and the last track, Oh, really present themselves. It's also electronic, just like Milo Xyloto, but this time it's a little more subtle. It's a little bit more backward in the atmosphere. And Chris Martin's breakdown with his wife Gwyneth Paltrow is the centerpiece of the lyrics of this album. And this strikes to me as their most beautiful sounding, their most intimate, their most haunted, but still very beautiful sounding in a long time. And definitely this album will get a review later on. Oh boy, we're at the last 2 albums of this list, so I'm going to get with this really quick. Number 2 is The Hunting Party by Linkin Park. My gosh, when this album came out and I first heard it, you see my expression in the first album review I did of that album. My gosh, a lot like Weezer, this album, I mean, Linkin Park really wasn't a band that really, it had its audience and they have their following, but really with the acclaim of Hybrid Theory, of everything else that they have been judged by, a lot like Weezer, they had their fans turn their backs on them for a number of years, and that's like they started turning back around Minutes at Midnight, really turned their back on them on A Thousand Suns, and then were virtually non-existent by the time Living Things came around. So with this band doing a complete about face with this album in comparison with the other three albums, this album is a gigantic monster. This album is visceral. This album is monstrous. This album is energetic, in your face, raw, like so in your face to the point that you literally feel Chester Bennington's breath in your face. This album is just energetic. This is visceral. Brad Delson, who had a huge part in making of this album, had a huge stake on here, and his guitar riffs, his leads are all over this album. Rob Borden too had a great impact on this album. This is their most aggressive album in a long time, and even though this album doesn't necessarily bring them back into the heyday of Hybrid Theory, this album has really cemented the spotlight on them in such a way that hasn't been since the days of Hybrid Theory and Meteora. And they make such a statement with this album that rock music is not dead. Rock music is here to stay. And this album, more than anything else, proves it. And like, I'm completely shocked by this album in a very great way. Now, number one, I'm pretty sure it's going to be very controversial because I was debating. This was very hard for me to do. Like, I was this close to putting Hunting Party as the number one album over the number one actual number one album. But in the end, the only difference I had between Linkin Park and this other band here, the band, is that I'm a closer fan to this band than I am of Linkin Park, as much as I do love them. Number one album of 2014 for me has to be Songs of Innocence by U2. Now I know that's going to strike to some of the viewers here as kind of biased because I am a huge U2 fan. I have been listening to the band ever since All That You Can Leave Behind, have immersed all their music from Boy all the way to, well, at the time, No Line on the Horizon. I absorbed all their material. And then to have this album on the Apple event released for free all over, well, Universal paid for the album to be released. All Apple did was just send it to the millions of iTunes customers. This album is just amazing, and it's not even so much just because of the music. Heck, if you even compare the Hunting Party to Songs of Innocence, there's a major difference. Hunting Party is a way more energetic and more attention-grabbing album than Songs of Innocence. So what is the thing that differs Songs of Innocence from the Hunting Party? Well, I would say that the thing that really differs that album from Linkin Park's album is the fact that Songs of Innocence has an intimacy to it. It has a vulnerability and a very open scope to this album. And yeah, being a bigger U2 fan definitely plays a factor, but the songs here on this album, they bring us on a journey. They bring us on an experience of all the band members' upbringings, the moments in their adolescent years that have made them, that have made them into the men that we see them now today. And songs like The Miracle of Joey Ramone serving as the band's main inspiration for doing what they do. Songs like California that announces that describes their travel to America, their travel to Los Angeles. Songs like Raised by Wolves that really starkly shows their very vividly the political upheaval of their time that have made them socially conscious activists in their quest for justice, for social justice. Songs like The Troubles that really show Bono at his most vulnerable. And songs like This Is Where You Can Reach Me Now, which kind of similar to Miracle, is that the inspiration of what made them them. And I love this album because it's their most intimate. They present, U2 has presented themselves in a way that they haven't done in a very, very long time. It's almost as if they're doing the Boy and October albums and the War albums, but from a more mature experience perspective. And as a U2 fan and as a music fan, I really commend this album because this album took chances. This album was really hugely anticipated, especially if you're a U2 fan. This album really comes out as an album about struggle, an album about looking into the past, acknowledging the past, but acknowledging it from a viewpoint of an experienced man, an experienced person. The music here is just awesome. The music here is energetic. The music here is experimental in a ways, but for sure it's definitely way more experimental than No Line on the Horizon. I am a huge U2 fan, and this album really cements itself as the number one album for me personally. For me. So, 21 minutes, and this has been top 10 albums for me for 2014. If you don't see an album here that you wanted to, or if you want to leave your albums, what are the albums that have impacted you this year? Leave a comment in the comment section below. I really want to see your choices. I really want to see your picks. And this is pretty much it. 2014 has been a unique year, and I can't wait to see what 2015 brings for us in the future. So 2014 has been awesome. Mr. Music Fan, top 10 albums of the year of 2014, and I will see you guys next year. So take care, guys. Have a happy new year, and yeah, much blessings to the new year. Take care, guys.